If any AI startup comes to you and say, we found how to evaluate truth, hold a reasonable doubt.
We know the internet is broken. We know it implicitly. And if you've been around long enough to remember the beginning of the internet, you know it explicitly. Every day, every Elon tweet, every Facebook and TikTok tracking feature, every viral piece of misinformation, we know where the virus came from. So, how do we fix it? Philippe Beaudoin thinks he can, or at least part of it. The ex-Googler and former Element AI co-founder is back with a new company, Waverly, that is hoping to change the way people consume content on the internet. Boy, howdy, do we need that now more than ever. Whether you lament the current death throes of the big blue bird, or you are just really concerned about how Jordan Peterson is one click away from every YouTube video, or maybe you just want your parents to consume something on the internet that you can talk about over the holidays. But as a first wave internet survivor, I have questions. You see, I was here for the beginning of web media and social media, and I remember the promises made. And I saw how these platforms and their algorithms were appropriated and misappropriated. So when I hear about a new way to internet, I want to hear about why the founders think it will be better than what came before, but also how they're going to prevent it from becoming everything else. So Philippe joins us today, a founder who thinks he's found a better way, or maybe just a better idea. Hey, at least he's willing to admit that he's running a media company. So let's dig in. Philippe, everyone hates the internet right now. I think we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about your company. We're going to talk about your work history. But I'm wondering if we could start by just a mutual bonding, maybe describing your current dissatisfaction with the internet and maybe how that contributed to the founding of Waverly.
My current biggest problem with the internet is I regret so much of the time I end up spending there. Like, I love it. I want to use it to learn more about the world, to connect with the people I care for, to have great conversations. But at the end of the day, sometimes I look back at what I've done on the internet and like, that was not time well spent. That's not how I want to be using my time. I've watched like these stupid clips on Facebook, or I got into stupid debates with people I don't care for. And like, why did I spend my time like that? How did it turn into this? I mean, I'm sure you and I, we go back, we had these big hopes for what this could become. And now I end up regretting the time I spent on it.
Is it just because you feel like it is wasted time, or is there another component to it? I want to say, like, you've played a bit of a role in like how people consume the internet, or at least browse it. Let's put it that way. Do you want to take us back a little bit to maybe how you would have seen this if you had been on one of the early podcasts I was doing in 2008, maybe? Maybe can you give us the delta between the excitement and the current day-to-day dissatisfaction? Because we booked this conversation mostly before things got really bad at Twitter, but I can't help but being reminded every minute of how bad the internet is right now.
That's a great question. I'm a nerd, right? Back in the early days of the internet, for me, it was finally a door into things that weren't around me back then. I was interested in so many different things, and finally I could find people like me on this big global network. It was amazing to have access to these things that weren't available around me. But at the same time, the internet wasn't that big. Not everybody was posting pictures of their trips around the world. Not everybody was posting tweets about how they felt. So because it was relatively small, we didn't need that many tools to make sense of what was happening. You join a forum, you check it every day, and you get updates on that thing you're passionate about. But what has changed is, well, first of all, it's not only nerds anymore. Everybody's in there. Everybody is doing what I used to be doing, which is, engaging, creating content, posting pictures, posting comments. That has changed. The other thing that has changed is, well, platforms evolved given how much more information gets published on the internet today. And the way in which it evolved is through this algorithmic curation. What's at the heart of the Twitter saga right now is largely that. How is information curated on the internet, given how much there is? How are our systems configured or built in order to help us just face that influx of information? And the way in which we decided to build that, this is what is causing me all the problems I'm talking about. It's not that I regret spending time on the internet or wasting my time, it's that the systems are actively getting me to spend time on the things I don't want to be spending time on.
So the machine is working as intended. It's just a shitty machine. Okay.
Because it wants to capture your attention because it's going to sell more ads if it does.
Yeah, okay. That makes a little bit more sense, because when you started off there, and I commiserate with it, and I would say, this is a safe space for white guy nerds to talk about how the internet used to be. It kind of seemed to me that you were going to be like, things were cool when there were fewer people, and then everyone showed up to this party and it started to suck, which I can believe in some instances. But I also feel like everyone got invited to this thing that they were told was a party, and then it turned out to be Hotel California, and no one can leave. And not only that, you're being tracked everywhere you're trying to go. Everything that you're saying is being monitored. And then everything you're being shown is either an ad, a diet pill, or a lie. That's a pretty big change from, say, 2005 or 2008 or whatever, right? Where does, I guess, Waverly come in to be a little bit of a vaccine to what's going on? Because in our story, just for our listeners, if they haven't read it, I don't know what you're doing, listen to the Beta Kid podcast if you're not reading Beta Kid every day. But if you happen to miss this story because the world's been on fire and the internet sucks, we position Waverly as a method to save the internet, which I feel is like a little bold. But there's at least components of what you described that you're trying to fix. What are those components? And then we're going to dig into how, and then we're going to ask all the big questions about whether or not you can pull it off and all that stuff. But let's start with the solutions that you're aiming for first, and we'll try to keep our audience following along with us.
Well, first of all, as you said, it's great that everybody is at that party, right? It's just that if you go back to 2005, 2008, back then, since there were not that many people, it was okay to use chronological feeds, the newest stuff first, for example. Even the name blogs come from that, right? It's backlogs. It's supposed to be in chronological order. But as more people got into the party, it didn't work anymore. So we evolved, let's say, algorithmic curation. So systems that can rank the information that you get in a more, quote unquote, intelligent way. Now, that's what we're trying to fix, because the way in which we built it, first of all, it's a monoculture. There's a single type of algorithmic curation algorithm on all the platforms you use. They all work in the same way. They track your behaviors. They track your clicks. They track what you open, what you spend time on, the people you interact with, all of that. They track this, and from that, they infer what you want. They basically make this assumption that however you act on the internet is exactly how you want the system to work for you. And this is what we're questioning. When I was talking about regretting the time I spent on the internet, I'm basically saying the way in which I behave, the way in which I decide to spend my time is often driven by some decisions I make that are not as rational as I would like them to be. I click on a stupid TikTok video and start watching it, and like, why did I do that? But my brain decided to do it. And then all the algorithms we have, they pick up on this and they say, let me bring you more of that. So Waverly, what do? We basically say, let's try something new, radically different as a recommender system, as a way to rank the content you will see on your feed. Yes, it's bold to say we're out to fix the internet, but it's not untrue, because this is such a huge part of the internet for everyone today that if we just try something new, something different in that space, well, it's bound to change the way we experience the internet quite a bit. And we actually believe it's going to make it a lot better.
Okay, so now you've accepted my bold claim and seconded it. So you now need to break down how. Like the algorithmic point is well taken in terms of the amplification loop sometimes where you're like, oh, I didn't mean to send that piece of information in the machine and now that's all I see. Or, oh man, I didn't super like that one thing and now I can never find it again. I don't think this is all about what's put in front of us, but what's lost. I don't actually see any content from my friends and family on Facebook anymore because there was a moment where Facebook decided that that wasn't what was best for me or best for them to show me at some point. And then people that you would see content from for years that you're like, maybe they just stopped using Facebook. They're still posting things. Facebook's just not showing that to you. How are you changing this? And you're talking about what's in the feed. I think that's nerd alert. We might talk about RSS at some point here, but the application is called Waverly. What are waves and how are waves created and how are waves consumed? Because that's probably
right at the heart of the Waverly is this concept called wave, right? And it's a bit similar to at the heart of Reddit, you have the subreddit. So you always have this thing that's very important. The platform for Waverly, it's waves. I think one of the best way to describe them is what you just did here. You just spent like a minute explaining what you were missing in your Facebook feed. You told me, I don't see anything from my friends and family there. Well, the goal of a wave is to basically let you say that, but to the machine. Instead of saying it to me, you write it down and you basically say, I'd like to see posts from my friends and family, especially on weekends or early in the morning, or I want to read articles from trustworthy sources in technology. Whatever you want to express, you typically are able to express it, to put it into words. Tell your friends, this is my ideal experience on Facebook would be X, on Twitter would be Y. Well, on Waverly, a wave is this expression. It's the little paragraph you write that expresses what you want your algorithm to do for you in plain language, plain English. And our goal at Waverly is to read this, understand what it means for your feed, and provide that feed for you. It's not easy. We're not able to do it for every parameterization, like every way you would like to configure your feed, but we're able to do it pretty well for things like topics right now, if you're interested in specific topics, specific sources. So we're able to parse this, and once you've written it, we basically give you a feed of content that matches what you've written.
So it's like an explicit ask rather than implicit behaviors, and it's trying to infer what you want.
You're just putting the algorithm work down on us.
I know, like suckers. Also, it's not Google Wave if you want to get super nerdy.
Wow.
No one,
I know.
no one, the five
one even
people are going
knows
to be
what
like,
that is.
great joke, Rob. Everyone else is going to be like, oh my God, did Google release a new text message application?
I'm sorry. This is for the two people who get that joke. Okay,
I do get it. I
Thank
was
you.
there.
You're
when-
one of the two. That's the sad part. Douglas is the other. That's the other really sad part. So you've got this fancy new shiny AI. But at the end of the day, I think back, I'm also old enough to remember Circa. Do you remember Circa? It was about 2012. It started as an iOS app. And the idea at the time, it was one of the first waves of apps that tried to get around bias. It was supposed to be these, like, it's very elegantly designed, these little chits where you could dive deep on a story. And it tried to be like, we're going to give you the unbiased internet. It wasn't as crappy as it is now, but it was still quote unquote biased. Ultimately failed to raise capital by 2015. And then I think Sinclair bought it, which is even scarier. But I guess what I'm wondering is, at the end of the day, you've got this fancy technology, but it's still like a media company. So are you not trying to headbutt the same kind of problem with fancy new tools, but it's still the same kind of problem, and the business model is tricky because it's just really hard?
So the business model is tricky. We think we have a pretty interesting way to try to crack that nut. But I don't remember this Circa thing. But as far as I know, it's the first time we try something that is, we could say, almost in between search and ranker, right? Search, you just put a couple of keywords, and typically it's really good at finding you exactly what you want right now. And algorithms, basically, you don't type anything. You basically just use the app and it's going to learn from your usage. We're basically saying, hey, if we allow users to express themselves in richer language than just plain keywords, they might be able to express something richer than just a search query. Maybe they can express how their algorithm should work for them. And we know because we've been writing these description of algorithms. We also know, by the way, that these are being written behind closed door at Twitter and Facebook. That's how they think about their own algorithm. They're like, what should be the policies in our algorithm? How should they work for users? Well, the goal of Waverly is to basically make that super transparent and controllable by the users themselves. I don't know if that's what Circa was doing. I don't think it was.
No, it wasn't quite that sophisticated. But I mean, at the end of the day, you're still picking topics. Then it was grabbing sources that were reputable and sort of containing them. Wasn't as fancy, but the same basic idea. So I guess what you're saying is you think that the algorithms will be transparent enough that you can understand how it thinks, and therefore it's reputable.
Yeah, so that's a big change, right? That's the biggest thing. And in terms of the platform right now, you're right. It feels a bit like that, or you could compare it to a Feedly.
This is where we start talking about RSS feeds, because maybe to Rob's point about previous attempts, whether or not the user explicit algorithm generation is novel, there's still a back-end component here, which is the content being served. And you're not just allowing the users to opt in and engage in curating their algorithm. You're also providing a database of content, right? And now this is where you were talking about the Google search term, but you're also indexing the internet in a certain way. Talk to us about how you're doing that and what's included in that content, because I think that bridges a bit of the gap between the UX on the front end, or the UI, and the actual user experience of what content's being served up.
So let's talk about the content right now, and maybe after that we can open it up a little bit so we can see that it's only the first step on the journey we wish to be taking here. But so right now, when you install Waverly, what you get is this ability to express what you would like your algorithm to do, but the kind of content we serve you is collected from the open internet. It's very much like Google. We have this crawler, if you want, that looks at what's openly available on different websites, and we index it. We have this AI that reads the article that's behind it and that tries to understand what it talks about and whether or not it matches what you've expressed in your wave, what you are interested in. That collection of content, that collection of articles, these are written articles for now on Waverly. That collection comes from any website that publishes content and that also attaches it to what's called an RSS feed, which is essentially...
It's just a really simple script, baby.
Well, it's really just it's like an automated email system. Whenever you publish something new, it gets in there, and then all the computers and the internet that are interested by new content on your website get notified, and they can download it and index it if they want. That's what Google uses to index a lot of blogs or news site. They use the RSS feed that's attached to it. We use the same thing. It's the underlying technology that allows any search engine to identify new content on the internet. And we basically built a similar engine to what exists at Google for news algorithms. And yes, we did select some sources to begin with. So most of the major newspapers have these RSS feeds, and we do index them. Also, a lot of blogs or Substack newsletters, they all have these RSS feeds. Now, we didn't select them necessarily for quality. And the best example of that is essentially if some Waverly user basically finds a new Substack newsletter and says, hey, there's an interesting article in there for my wave, they can actually take that article and share it to Waverly. And what we start doing at that point is we basically identify the attached RSS feed and start indexing it. So our index constantly grows. We are not picking everything ourselves. It doesn't mean that the quality isn't there on Waverly. You might get some random articles you don't care for, but our goal, again, is to abide by your wave. So if you wrote your wave in a way that lets quality emerge because you said you cared about it or you cared about some specific sources, then you will get like these kind of quality articles in your feed.
I think that's important because you're not only talking about like user-driven search criteria, but also user-driven submissions of what content that might feed the broader database, right? It's funny. We started off with a conversation talking about the internet, and then we immediately started talking about how bad social media is, which I think is a good reflection of where the internet is in 2022 compared to any of the prior 3 friggin' decades. Do you feel like in trying to fix the internet, you're actually competing with social media, or you're actually competing against the fact that social media has become the default distribution mechanism for information.
It's very interesting. It's a young startup. We're 2 years old, but we've had our identity crisis already. Are we a social media? Are we not? We did build some social features in there. We took them out. I think we want to bring them back. The important thing to us is not to be like the way in which you configure the algorithms in Waverly is great to curate your stream of articles, but it would be much better if you could use it to curate your social media, your YouTube channels, you're like everywhere you have this huge influx of information and you're trying to organize it a bit better. If you had access to something like Waverly to do it, it would be great. Unfortunately, there is no way to inject your own algorithm into YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, so we can't do that now. That's why we built our own platform. But what we realize is that the users on this platform that we built, they actually are starting these little communities, right? People can create waves on Waverly and make them public, and others can find them and follow them. And we see these dynamics emerging. And right now, the only thing you can do that looks a bit social is you can basically tell a wave, yes, that was a good algorithm, and you give it like a check to say that was a good choice for this wave, good article for that wave. You did your job. But then your little face appears on the article as someone who curated it or helped the algorithm understand that it was a good choice. And just these little faces are already drawing this social aspect to it. People like to work together on their waves, and they enjoy seeing others following their waves, and they try to make it better. And what we're realizing, I think, more and more is that we kind of got trapped with the term social media. It's like social media was only one thing, but the truth is every platform is a little bit social these days. And we believe the future of Waverly will be this really good platform for the content you deeply care about, but it should not prevent you from engaging with others if that's what makes that content rich for you. So we are thinking about bringing back these social aspects, but what's even more interesting is these social aspects will also be curated by your waves. Like if there are conversations you care about, you can express that in your waves. You can say, hey, I'm interested in the intellectual conversations with people close to me or with people who have different views than I have. And if you write that, the algorithm should be able to pick up the right conversation and surface them. This is all for our future roadmap. We need to get our fundraise underway to get there, but you get the idea.
Yeah. I think we could ask several questions about like, well, when are you going to start incorporating these types of content or things like this? But for the fundamental component right now, which is mostly published pieces of information through RSS feeds that users are identifying through concepts that they want to consume, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between evaluating the concepts and how you just like organize that, but then how you're ranking the content's value related to that. Because you even noted previously, whether it's Google, Twitter, Facebook, or whether, generally pretty private about how they evaluate content. Some would say for the protection of those systems. Some would say for proprietary interests. You've got an initial database, of which BetaKit was included, high quality content, and then user submitted content, and then user defined concepts or terms or user prompted terms to like identify, hey, I want deep thinking on Canadian tech and startups or clean tech information or business news from only bald people named Rob. All of those things. Saying it's just content that matches one-to-one with the initial natural language concept that was laid out is pretty friggin' cool. But I'm wondering how that leads to a better experience when that information can be very siloed, but then also not evaluated by anyone for like level of quality. Is this just another different reinforcement technique where you're actually, instead of being at a party with everyone else and there's too much noise, you're in that episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where like Crusher's the only person left on the ship because she's trapped in a warp bubble and it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's because she's in this little pocket universe that she needs to escape from. Like, if anyone is listening this far into this episode, they have 100% seen that episode. So I don't even feel like we're like limiting people. Philippe, I know you have seen that episode. Everyone knows what I'm talking about here. Like, I'm interested in it being so individually user driven by concept and affirmation of content that we're now not just recreating some of the really darker parts of the internet, whereby people just get in reinforcements of what they like seeing, and you are able to give them the Fox News of their choice, depending, right? Are you doing any evaluation for content beyond kind of matches this concept?
So that's a beautiful question. Are we just going to let people craft their perfect filter bubbles? But the way to think about Wave, maybe one interesting way to think about them is as your own personal editorial line, right? And you can write an editorial line that favors diversity, that seeks out diversity. You can basically say, what I'm interested in are diverse point of views on crypto. And then the goal of the algorithm, if it works well, should be to bring you a balanced diet in your feed where you get a bit of one point of view, a bit of the other. And eventually maybe you can specify what kind of diversity you seek. Are you seeking the left-right diversity or whatever, right?
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's even stick on this idea because I think everyone can understand. And again, we go to this in more detail in the article and everyone can download the app now and try it. But there's just this idea of like, they've got to kind of prompt their desire to expand their horizons a little bit. Like, do you prompt them to say like, hey, do you want trustworthy sources? Do you want fair and balanced news? And like most people, regardless of what they're reading, will say yes. And then you just happen to give them the actual content that is fair and balanced. Or like you're still making an evaluation on the content there then, right? Not just Fox calls itself fair and balanced and therefore
exactly. We need to break that apart, right? And like, are we trusting the sources themselves and what they say? You know, Fox might say, I'm a trustworthy source and I bring balanced viewpoints. So first of all, I mean, it's early days for that technology. Small team. We're the first one to try something like that. It's not working as we want it to work in a couple of years, but we're on the journey there. The goal, really, the reason why you will get that diversity, we believe, is, first of all, we're not prompting people and say, hey, add diversity there. We're not doing it right now. But these waves, you can make them public and they're always transparent. You can read what you've written. So it's a bit like what we see in places like Midjourney, you know, the prompt engineering places where people start sharing their prompt and they start seeing what others write. And we believe that as waves evolve, people will see what others are writing and they say, yeah, that's a good piece. I might steal it, right? I might take from your wave the idea that I want balanced viewpoint or that I want quality content. But then how do you evaluate quality content? Our hope with Waverly is that eventually you'll be able to specify what quality content means to you. And what it could mean, for example, is, well, this third party considers that this source should be trustworthy, or this blogger is 2 levels from a trustworthy blogger according to X, right? So we want to get there at some point so that we have, Waverly offers third-party trust mechanisms that you can rely on. Right now, that's a bit how the current social platforms work. They quote-unquote evaluate trust based on how far or how close they could be to your own.
Depends on which day and who owns them, sir. We'll see when this episode comes out if that's still true. But essentially what you're saying is you got to build a database of information first so that you can cross-reference it with other evaluation criteria, right? Okay.
That's exactly it. Or even support third-party who do that.
Gotcha. So you're willing to open up that a little bit and kind of...
Absolutely.
Hey founders, do you need help with your business? Well, thankfully, Caravel supports you through it all. From incorporating a new company to raising funds as you scale, all the way to successful exits. Caravel has been a leader in Canadian legal innovation for years, and their lawyers are trained at the best firms in Canada, meaning they have the experience you're looking for, but with a new and innovative business model and flexible rates that deliver excellent value. To learn more, visit caravellaw.com, that's CARAVEL law.com, or reach out to their client happiness specialist, Felicia, at info@caravellaw.com. Can we even just go back to, because you'd said something very interesting before about like moving just beyond keyword based. How are you getting that to the concept level? Because I feel like in the hypothetical Fox News, and I don't know why I'm ragging on them, I just came top of mind when you go to fair and balanced in a keyword based system, that would look at anything with the use of fair and balanced and might rank on number of times fair and balanced is included, things like that. How are you pushing past that to say the concept of fairness? Because I think that's something that might get lost in the sauce here. And people are like, oh, wow, they're actually evaluating the idea of truthiness or fairness or
we're not
intellectual
we're not.
or
Honestly, if any AI startup comes to you and say we found how to evaluate truth, you should hold a reasonable doubt. I don't think we're close to this, right? Humans have a hard time doing it for themselves. So no, we're not pretending we can do that, but we are evaluating articles at a more abstract level than a keyword-based system. Like meaning that we are trying to understand what really matters in this article. We're trying to understand what tone is being used. Is this more of a factual tone or more of an opinion tone, for example? That all of these concepts we are able to extract to an extent from the articles we index. So a wave like that wants to be interested in these different aspects of articles, we can actually promote them or demote them. So that's how far we can go right now. But it's much beyond keywords, right? Because if you start writing the article, this article is factual, but then you end up using a very opinionated tone in the rest of the article, we will figure this out.
and again, so if someone writes misinformation in a factual tone, it doesn't get automatically passed
Yes,
through.
exactly. That's why we believe that trustworthiness is best handled through other means. Like right now, the evaluation of trustworthiness on existing platforms is totally opaque. You don't know how they evaluate whether or not a source or a piece of content should be trusted. In our case, we want to make that super explicit. We want the wave itself to express what trustworthy means to it, and then to provide mechanisms to evaluate it.
It's a monkey. It's a hidden monkey that just throws papers
It's
down
a thousand
the stairs.
monkeys. You got to.
They just throw papers down the stairs, and whichever one lands on the top, that's how trustworthy. But you founded a very small, insignificant company called Element AI. It did pretty well, if memory serves. And what's interesting is, I'm thinking back to the point that you just made. I remember when Microsoft came out with that Twitter bot, and they're like, look at the Twitter bot, and it accidentally became a Nazi, and they had to take it offline. So obviously your sources aren't Twitter, which is a good thing. I'm curious what you learned from the Element experience. Yes, you've done AI before, but this was AI at scale, truly at scale. What did you learn from that experience, and how are you applying it to Waverly?
Yeah, Element AI was one extreme. Waverly is the other. Like Waverly is a total product-led startup.
Totally. Yeah, no, I know. But you had so many, you were doing AI at scale at Element, right? Like you got to see it at as big as it can get, basically.
That's right. Like my biggest learning from Element AI is that there's a ton of AI that works today that is not being exploited in the products that are being offered. They're being exploited a little bit at the big tech companies, but very little in a lot of the products that are being built. And if you understand how AI works and what its limitations are, instead of saying, hey, we'll get to AGI soon, so let's forget about any limitations that the current AI systems have. If you understand the current limitations of the AI system, you can actually start building products that really benefit from all the progress that have happened in AI in the last 10
So you're
years.
saying that, like, I think a lot of quote unquote AI startups these days are trying to build a data set that they train on, which takes years. You're saying that based on the advancements that we already have with natural language processing, with image recognition, all that other stuff, you don't need to reinvent AI. You can actually use it as a feature rather than say, I'm inventing this whole new AI and actually build a reasonable company off. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's right. I think the right way to build an AI startup is like you won't start with a novel data set. Okay, maybe you have secret access to it. But the truth is you should build a system that will generate the data that will be useful to you in the future. And you should be able to build that system, that product, using data sets that exist today. That's the approach we're taking. Our wave are being evaluated using pre-trained natural language understanding models that work on generic natural language data set. And we're doing what we can from there. But at the same time, we're building the first database of intentions. Like users are expressing to Waverly their intention when it comes to content consumption. And what we believe we will be able to do is bootstrap a really good natural language understanding. You could call it a foundation model if you want, but a foundation model that is based on users' intention, because we will have that data set, but we won't just have the data set. We will have the data set. It will grow continuously. and it will be evaluated continuously, meaning that the algorithm we build will be evaluated by users telling us whether or not the articles we pick are good according to the intention they expressed. What we believe is at the end of the day, that's how you build a great AI startup. You start with something that can be done today, build an MVP that allows you to start a process that will let you gather data and evaluation based on that data that nobody else has. And in our case, it's users' intentions.
So you've got a data set, you've got an AI foundation that you're building on, and then Waverly is obviously the users, the data, the users are adding something to it to create a specialized data set specifically focused on Waverly. What's the data that you're training on? Is it like the people sharing stuff or?
Well, yeah. And is the intention different than like, by that you mean long-term intention, not like someone types in a Google search bar, they have an intention to find something, but it's of the moment. You mean like, this is what I meant when I wanted fair and balanced information about tech.
Exactly it. Like, what are we training on? What will we train on once we get into that next stage of Waverly? That's these waves. These waves are exactly, as you said, Doug, these are long-term intentions. These are meant to live with you. You know, maybe you change them over time, but it's meant to, like, whenever you open your app, it's the wave that's working for you. Like a search query is done after you've found what you were looking for, but a wave is meant to be valid today, tomorrow, next week, and to evolve with you a little bit. When I was talking about what AI can do today, something AI can do today is generate text. We're getting really good at generative models, GPT-3 kind of stuff. What's hard with Waverly today is writing these waves. It's hard to figure out what you want and to express it in natural language. But what we've started experimenting with is using these generative language to help people come up with their waves. So basically, we look at how you behave in the app, and then instead of using this behavior to tune your feed, we use it to generate a sentence and say, hey, would you like Waverly to work like that for you? So it's essentially a generated wave, and we could propose that to users. This is like prototype. We have that in very early version. We're not showing that to users yet, but it clearly can work.
I can't wait till we have you back on and be like, so we showed users what they actually told us they wanted, and they flipped out. But I think it speaks to that long-term intention, and I guess you were talking about that foundational model of like, well, this is what people say that they want. This is what people reinforced. So we've always been at war with Eurasia kind of happens. And, you know, but because we're starting now to get to kind of the business considerations here. And you spoke a little bit about how AI can be exploited. And I think you meant like positively exploited, like to be utilized. But you also noted a willingness to open up your data with other third-party providers to make the service smarter. That's not a thing that really happens at any of the other social networks. And in fact, they're pretty closed off either to their benefit or to prevent obvious gaming, right? We were using the example of like, well, what if you wrote something in a very factual tone, but it was absolutely crazy? Could you get past the Waverly team? So you're looking to try and get other tools to come in and validate against that. I'm wondering, how does this then relate to how you're going to make money? Facebook didn't become the sad Facebook it is now until they decided that it was more profitable for them to never show me the friends and family they initially wanted me to connect with, to then show me Midwestern trucker comedian videos all the time.
Now I know what you click on.
Right? Yeah. And I don't even know how I got there, but I can never get away. Tell us why, for some reason, business professionals are the only people that can be trusted on the internet to not ruin it, and how you're going to profit from that. And then we'll talk about how people are going to try and break Waverly.
So yeah, that's right. You refer to business professionals. This is the segment we're going after first for monetization. So basically, when you look at how platforms monetize in North America, they tend to have like a single diet. You know, either they monetize through ads, and 99% of their revenue is coming through ads, or they monetize through subscription. 99% of their revenue is coming from subscriptions. And interestingly, it feels like for something like a social network, the only way to do it is ads, because people will never pay for it. China, it's interesting because these equivalent platforms have much more diverse revenue mix because advertising has less value there.
How can we add payment processing? If we can just add payment processing, we don't need to care about anything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at Twitch, right? It did it. It did it through tipping, and suddenly you have payment processing in the platform, and you can basically monetize the platform. Yes, they do advertising, but a lot less than others, and they can monetize through other means. So, like, how do we get to a platform that has these more interesting revenue mix? For us, it's by starting, and it's essentially, this is where we found traction, right? It's by starting with people who care enough about the information they consume that they want to pay for a system that cares as much as they do, which is Waverly, right? So, like, who are these people? Like, if I go to some random Facebook or Twitter user today, they don't it's not a problem. They feel acutely enough to say, yes, I'm going to pay for a service that's going to help me get to the information I care for. But if you talk to professionals, if you talk to companies, they're like, yeah, well, I mean, my staff is getting informed on Twitter and Facebook, and you know what? It's not necessarily the best way for us to learn about what matters.
There's
for
a
the
lot of
company.
Jordan Peterson conversations going on right now at the office, and we do not feel comfortable about that. Yeah,
and it happens everywhere. So businesses care more and more about the information that they gather, the information that gets disseminated through the company, and they are figuring out more and more than the email newsletter that they send, well, nobody reads it, right? So how can we get a really good information dissemination, information discovery experience for companies who care enough about what they, meaning them, their employees, everyone at the company, what they consume, so that they're like, yep, I'm going to pay monthly for a platform that has incentives very aligned with me and tries really hard to bring a great discovery and information consumption experience to my entire company. So that's why we're going after them. We believe that we can monetize through like individuals converting into pro users because they care enough about it, but eventually turning their entire company into a pro user with private waves and all they care for.
Okay, so fundamentally what you're saying, when taken in context with the rest of our discussion, is that business professionals are the only people on the internet that are sincere about their intentions and willing to pay for quality information?
It's not they're sincere or insincere, but
well, they're the most likely to like mean what they actually want because they're using it for a specific outcome, right?
So that's true, but also they value it enough that they will take money out of their pocket and pay for an assistant that helps them get there.
In this framework, I completely agree with the conclusion we've come to, but I don't feel great about it as a Twitter user who spends most of his time ragging on business professionals for a variety of reasons.
I mean, it makes sense. B2B makes sense, especially as a Canadian company. But if you ultimately want to touch on the B2C market, as I was saying before, media businesses are notoriously hard to monetize. And so when you go into the consumer landscape, are you not forced to play the ad game to drive users to Waverly? Like either advertising on social media or doing keywords on Google, where you're kind of feeding the beast that will get you the likes that you want, and then all of a sudden you're going down this vicious cycle.
Are you just creating your own Waverly verified situation?
Yeah.
3 years from now.
We'll have an orange check mark.
Totally different. It's $7.
That's a great question. We kind of see the value of advertising going down everywhere. I think it's ushering an era where alternative monetization model, even for B2C platforms, will start to make more and more sense. Yeah, I don't know as we go to B2C how we can monetize that. Like the dream is that this realization that buying a service that cares about your attention as much as you do is something worthwhile. Like this realization, we think will spread from business professionals to more and more people. Even right now, I'm saying my biggest segment is business professionals, but I have a lot of curious users who are aware enough of the misaligned incentive of advertising-based media that they pay for their Waverly Pro subscription. So by the way, Waverly is totally free. You can install it. You can do everything on it. It's up until the point where you try to train your second AI with your second wave, where Waverly will say, hey, maybe you should pay and become pro.
Maybe you're a business professional and you don't know it.
Maybe your boss will write this off for you.
That's right.
Exactly.
like the iPhone became something that everybody was comfortable paying for, we think that at some point we may reach a point where people are comfortable paying for an assistant that really cares about understanding their intention. And that's where we think Waverly will make a major difference.
I think
Especially, and you touched on it a little bit, Doug, if that assistant can interface with every tool you have or every information consumption device you have. If Facebook or Twitter eventually evolves to allow for third-party algorithms to work for you, we want Waverly to be the best pick you can choose, the best one you can choose, because we've been working so long at understanding users' intention that we're the best at it.
I think it's more likely that you'll soon have Marvel characters in Game of Thrones on Waverly than that happening. But it is a cool vision. As someone who grew up paying for things, who is okay with paying for things and hopes that we one day pay for things again, so we can get out of this current cycle of having everything free and absolutely hating it. I get you. But I think maybe this is the transition, and maybe talk about the more likely scenario that's happened over the last 10 years, which is people look at this system that is user-generated, self-selected, a community of individuals operating as a vaccine against the misinformation or distraction organism that is the internet. And they say, you know what? How can we make some money off of this or ruin an election? We've talked a lot about Waverly being a better way to consume content away from noise and distractions. I'm more interested in the consumption of misinformation and disinformation. What protections have you built into Waverly for that? And what types of attacks do you expect for this different type of system? Particularly since you're looking to be actually more open and transparent about how you're indexing this information than pretty much everywhere else.
Just to get out of the way, I mean, opacity can help you a little bit against attack, but the truth is it's never a really good strategy, right? I mean, the problem with opacity is that the really, really bad guys eventually figure out how you work and they can attack you, but you don't realize.
It's the open source argument. A closed source doesn't make it better.
It tends not
obscurity.
to.
It's security through obscurity, which is not security.
Exactly. So this argument that is sometimes used by the likes of Google to say, well, if we make the algorithm public, people will be able to game it better or attack it better. I take that with a huge grain of salt. I don't think that it's the biggest motivation. I think, it's like, hey, if we make the algorithm public, everybody will have it.
Okay. So they're not doing it because of business considerations.
Well, I mean, probably a mix of both, right? But
this is this is ex-Googler nodding, but not saying, okay.
I'm not saying anything.
Duly noted. Well, not saying anything. But
it was above my pay grade for sure. So this kind of thing. To come back to, what are we doing to prevent adversarial attacks on algorithms like that, right? So first of all, if you express the intention and the intention is transparent, you are the first line of defense. As you start getting content that doesn't match the intention you express in your wave, you can flag it. Right now, we flag stuff that we find on Twitter when it's anti-Semitic, when it's really, really bad. But on Waverly, you flag stuff because, well, it's not what I'm looking for with this wave. So everybody becomes defender on Waverly of the editorial line they put forward in their wave. Every time you get an article, you're asked, is that a fit? Is that not a fit? Right?
I hate to bring this up in this regard, but we talked about this before in our last conversation, and I think it's worthwhile, particularly given the rise of anti-Semitism the last several weeks with major media influencers and celebrities sharing out information. Aren't you then just making it really easy for people to find all the anti-Semitism that they want because they can self-select for it?
So look at Google, right? If you look for anti-Semitic content on Google, you will find it. But you have to be very explicit with your query. Unless the content is beyond the boundaries of the law, right? In which case, Google doesn't index it. Like, we want to do exactly the same. We don't want to be indexing content that is beyond the law. But the real problem of platforms is not what they index and what they don't index. It's what they amplify versus what they don't amplify. Like, people talk about freedom of expression and censorship. But the truth is much more subtle. It's like, hey, something is getting amplified because it talks about X, and it's getting muted because it talks about Y. And what does it mean? Just like more people see it or less people see it, and then more people share it, less people share it. So it's in these subtle amplification mechanisms that we want, like, I think the real value lies. So the problem with a Facebook is you never express the intention for anti-Semitic content, and it eventually pops up on your feed. Why? Because it's really engaging.
It's always one click away somehow.
Exactly. If it's triggering content, if it's hateful speech, these things are really good at capturing people's attention. They never explicitly express they want it, but it comes there. On Waverly, if you explicitly write it, I want anti-Semitic content, first of all, you have to have the guts to read your wave and say, I'm that person. I'm the person who wrote that. Same way you have to read the query you write on Google and say, yep, that's really what I'm interested in.
Incognito mode. Sorry. Just joking.
In concepto mode, where it's like hidden concepts.
Works.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what I'm doing.
But the second thing is we can monitor these waves. We can know what people are asking for. We can, if there are like waves that we consider we shouldn't be accepting that as an intention of any user, well, we can shut them down.
Let's talk about that. And this goes back to the question that Rob asked almost at the very top of this. Whether you decide to add those social media features or not, at the end of the day, you are producing a media entity that is actually user-driven based upon wants and needs. And I'm wondering how you're going to handle whether you're going to be the actual one media internet company that actually admits that you're a media company and do something about the content. Because in the best case scenario, we frame this as user-driven inoculation against the worst of the internet. In the worst case scenario, it's creating a bunch of silos of tribes of horrible things and people that are supported by their own tribalism and the terrible ideas that they reinforce. Is Waverly willing to step in at that point and say, not these things? Or do you even shadow ban them so they actually can't get out of the, like, how are you approaching content moderation given a week where we have all realized, and even the richest man in the world has realized, that if you are doing anything in information technologies, you are a media company, and the only thing that matters is content moderation?
Let me admit it here first, before I have a huge PR team that would prevent me from doing it. I do believe that to an extent, every social media company is a media company, including us. You need to have an editorial line. And for a social media company or for Waverly, it means, how does the algorithm work? What are you amplifying? What are you muting? How does your moderation work? How quickly do you turn around when someone flags content? Like, how often do you evaluate it? All of these things can be made a lot more transparent than they are today. They should be. They should be open to the point where researchers external to the company should be able to run their experiments on it and make hypotheses and test them. That's how I believe these systems should work. It's slightly different than a traditional media company where there is no algorithmic curation, but it shouldn't stop these companies from being accountable for the quote-unquote editorial decision they make, even if the editorial decisions are made by algorithmic curation. So yes, we are like that. I mean, the big difference between us and others is that, first, these algorithms are going to be very transparent because they're going to be written by users, at least in natural language. How we implement them behind is just, hopefully we're able to implement them like
dumb math stuff. Yeah.
Express, right? But we want to be clear, right? If you say, hey, I want the content from my family to be promoted and we're not doing it, it's a bug, right? It's not like, oh, behind the scene, we're trying to do something different than what you ask. It's a bug, especially if you are paying for it because we're incentivized to do what you're asking us to do. Yeah, for us, like the ultimate transparency is to say, hey, the algorithm is not only transparent, it's created jointly with the users themselves, as they write it.
So maybe a final question here, because I know we're pushing you very hard on things that might and probably will happen, or at least that you'll have to deal with as you go forward.
Also, where were you on the night?
This is just as the state of building a new internet in 2022 is that you are held accountable and responsible for every prior internet that has come to fore.
Well,
And-
I've done some of that stuff when I was Google myself.
Yeah, hey,
It's
we've
penance.
all
This is
there.
penance.
This isn't my first podcast. I guess we're just right now, given the time of this, and it truly for our audience, this was not a planned thing. This was actually just scheduled in based upon your availability. It happened to be right in the middle of social network setting itself on fire while others face dramatic financial loss. We're currently seeing public and private social companies really flail, perhaps in the beginning of their death throes. Do you think that we can have a healthy internet that's built on the backs of corporate interests? And I mean that as a small company, large company, enterprise, whatever. Like, do you think that that's possible? And I'm wondering with that, just what do you think of Jack Dorsey's Web 5 project, where the last guy to run Twitter before the new guy is like, you know what? Actually, this should just entirely be a protocol. This was something that I've argued before, maybe naively. And the only way to prevent it from being overrun by vanity is to have a system work. Like, you've all obviously incorporated, you have raised some financing. Do you think that corporate interests can drive a positive internet experience?
I think corporate interest can be a part of it, but we need to be much better at moving towards protocols. The problem with protocols is that they don't evolve that fast. But once we found something that works, often through a private company, like we found social network was better in some ways than traditional emails, well, we moved emails to protocols. We never moved social networks to protocols. It's not true. There are some protocols, but they never caught on. They were never promoted. We never did any social push for the adoption of protocols that would open up the space of social media. I think that's the mistake. I think corporate interests are good at exploring a bunch of different things and figuring out what the next step should be. And that's why we think a corporate venture is like a for-profit venture like Waverly is the best way to explore these bold new algorithms that are trying to capture users' intentions and build natural language understanding model on top of it. If you try to do that in public, it's going to take forever. I mean, academics are doing some of that, but there are some limits as to what you can do in academia. I'm an academic myself. This is where I was born and bred, and I talk with researchers all the time. But it's like a university is not the right place to build something like that because it's a social experiment. There are too many humans involved. So I think a private corporation is really good at exploring, but as a society, we should be much better at recognizing the value of turning these successful experiments into protocols and at promoting the adoption of these protocols. It's amazing to me that we haven't pushed for that in the case of social media.
Well, on behalf of Rob and myself, who are just two dudes on the internet, we are certainly rooting for you to figure at least some of this stuff out. And again, verified waves, we'll check us in the mail. We'll have that ready for you as soon as you're willing to put a check mark beside our names, sir.
I'm sending my team to build a check mark feature. It's going to be ready in a week. If they have to sleep on the ground,
fired.
The Beta Kid Podcast is produced by Beta Kid Incorporated. It's edited by Katie Lohr, and its hosts are Rob Kennedy and me, Douglas Saltis. To learn more about how you can support this podcast, head to patreon.com/BetaKit.